Ladies and gentlemen, hello. Welcome to this week's live YouTube stream. So this week I'm going to go back to a very important subject. The subject for this week is the essential basics of Vedic thought. Because what we're doing is Vedic astrology, right? This actually cracks me up in a frustrating way. Like, people say, how can you be a Vedic astrologer if your zodiac is not sidereal? So they're taking this word Vedic and making it as if it means sidereal. When the reason why it's so troubling to me is because that word Vedic is so precious and means so much. It means that this astrology has some relationship to something called the Veda, which is so valuable. It's the source of the philosophical. It's the philosophical womb of the world. Is the Veda. I mean, it's the womb of the world's philosophy. It's such a beautiful, important, deep thing. And just to say, well, no, Vedic astrology is sidereal astrology and Western astrology is tropical astrology is so disheartening to the hope that people would get what they could really truly get from Vedic astrology. So I want to go and show you what Vedic really means. What is Vedic? Sound good? Yep, we got a drum roll. All right. So you can see I'm back up in this is my winter spot. All right, so let's do this. So these are the topics that I'm going to cover. All right, let me switch on over here. I'll show you the topics I'm going to cover today. I think I'm going to cover them today because I want to stop and ask you questions. If you have questions and stuff like that, we don't know how much time it's going to take. If it doesn't take today, then we can continue it next week. You might be thinking, what about the Navamsha things that you did last week? I got a little frustrated with that because I feel like it's over people's heads on a practical level. So I want to get some things ironed out first before we go back to some more detailed things, like using amshas. And these are the most important fundamentals. Is what is Vedic? This is Vedic astrology. So what's Veda? What's Vedic? So here's the stuff we're going to cover. What are the Vedas, or what is the Veda? Okay, that's the first topic we're going to cover. Second topic is how do you access them? How do you read them? And then let's look at the actual content, the essential content of the way that Vedic people think. So there's going to be 6 main principles. Consciousness. What's the opinion of consciousness? What's the Vedic thought on consciousness? What's the Vedic thought about soul? What's the Vedic thought about action or karma? So consciousness is Brahman, soul is Atma. What's the Vedic thought about karma, action? What's the Vedic thought about Bhuta, matter, Daiva, divinity, and Yagya, motive? So the reason why these 6 are there is these are the classical 6 topics of the Vedanta, and Arjuna even asks Krishna these questions in Gita. What are these 6 things? So we'll cover these 6 things as a way for you to understand a summary of the whole Vedic mind. How does the Vedic mind think about reality? And then you'll see, like, wow, these planets in this house and all this stuff, now it has this wonderful background. It's not just some information about what's going to happen to me in my life in this certain time and why I should be depressed or why I should be hopeful. But I have this whole safety net of information upon which to rely to improve my life and enrich my life. All right. Any questions before we start about the Vedas? Like any random questions about what the Vedas are? Let's start with that. Let's see what you got here. I should always clean my glasses. Yeah, interesting questions from Indrago Money. I would love to read the Vedas, but I can't find them anywhere. So if we explain what the Vedas are, you might see that actually you can read the Vedas. You can find them around. Who are the guys who wrote them? Let's talk about that. Okay. Yeah, so let's talk about how do you read them? That's one of the topics. Where do you find them? Who read them? The paths to bhakti. I want to talk about that. Also, make sure I mention that. Okay, John. Bhakti, karma, jnana. It's not exactly on my list of bullet points. It should be before we do the 6 things. Before we do the 6 topics, let me mention about the 3 categories of yogas. All right, then let's get started with what they are. So what the Vedas are, it will blow your mind. And that's the first thing, that's the problem, is if you learn about what the Vedas are from people who haven't soaked it in and haven't lived in it, then you get their view from the outside of what the Vedas are. So, like if you listen to a British scholar tell you what the Vedas are, or if you listen to some philosophy teacher in college tell you what the Vedas are, they're going to tell you from their point of view what the Vedas are. But if you sit in the Vedas and live it, soak it in, then you can understand what it really is. So the Vedas describe themselves as a revelation of the knowledge that's inherent in reality itself. So you got that? The Vedas are a revelation of knowledge, information, true, accurate perception. That's what knowledge is, right? The Vedas are a revelation of accurate perception of reality. But that perception, the knowledge of the reality is inherent in the reality itself. So let me explain it with a simple example, very simple example. It's not like the Vedas are only about this particular example, but I'm just using this example to show you what I mean by inherent knowledge and the revelation of it. So, a rose, inherent in the rose are its qualities. Redness, whiteness, whatever color it is. Fragrance, whatever fragrance it has. Softness, whatever texture it has, etc. Right? The ability to perceive and know the rose is inherent in the rose. Now, however, you don't recognize the patterns of the rose unless you have some information in your processing unit, in your mercury. The rose can come into you through your senses of Venus, but unless Mercury has the pattern recognition to understand what it is, it doesn't recognize things. So it may not recognize the difference between an orange rose and a red rose because it may not know the difference between orange and red. But if the Mercury unit, the intellectual processing unit, is informed from somewhere, educated from somewhere, then it has the ability to recognize the knowledge that's inherent in the things that it's looking at. It's able to recognize the things accurately. So what the Vedas are is a way to say, what the Vedas do is they reveal the things that you can recognize in reality to recognize it accurately, which means the same way that the manifester of reality recognizes it. So, for example, like if we have a red rose and we have a person who just popped in off another planet and never saw colors before, the earthly colors that we have, and then first thing I do is I explain to them, this is red, and you see, this is orange, and this is the difference, and then I show them a rose, and I say, what color is it? They're going to say it's red. But if I don't do that whole information giving part first, and I just show them the rose, and I say what color it is, they'll say, what's color? I don't understand. Right? So your perception of reality is informed through your Mercury. So that's why Venus and Mercury are so close. Venus is the incoming senses, and Mercury is the sensual processor. So the Vedas are a revelation from the manifester of the rose, from the manifester of reality, to the rest of us, saying, this is the stuff that you need to know to be able to perceive this world the same way I do. Why would you want to perceive the world the same way the manifestor does? Because the manifestor is full of bliss and happiness and eternality and infinitude. And that's what we want. So that's what the Vedas are. That's why they're described as having no author. This is one of the questions is who wrote them. They're described as being apurusheya, beyond people. They're not authored, but it's a revelation from the actual man. They're not authored or created at some time. Like, is the redness of a rose created at some point besides the rose's existence? No, it's not authored. It's part of the object itself. So the Veda is not some book written at some point in history, but it's the inherent knowledge of the universe itself being manifest to you. And the tradition holds that it's manifest first. The first author, so to speak, is Vishnu, who puts it, without words, into the heart of Brahma. Right? The first author is Vishnu, who puts this information, this ability to perceive reality, into the heart of Brahma. Tene Brahma Hridaya Adi Kavaye. That Vishnu puts this Veda into the heart of Brahma. Brahma is then in charge of making it happen, manifesting the reality of it. And so he creates Vak, creates words, manifested in a verbal shape. So Brahma is the first one to verbalize the Veda. And this is before human history. It was before there were humans. And he verbalizes the Veda and creates some offspring and teaches it to them. And then they codify it into mantras, these core mantras. Okay? And then they start to pass it down. They start to create more and more beings and life forms, and they start to teach these mantras, the codified forms of the Veda, to them. And they start to say, you also explain it to other people. And so the Veda starts to grow. Because with each person's explanation, sometimes it's a very good explanation, and you want to keep it. It really clarifies something. So the Veda starts to grow and grow and grow. So at the core, there's this one Veda, and then there's people explaining it, and it starts to grow. Then, when you get into this is in ages forgotten, undocumented ages. This happened, not even on our plane of existence. But as you come into our historical era, as you gradually get into our historical era, it's said in the Vedas that the ability of people to comprehend those mantras, the Veda, becomes less and less and less and less and less. So even at the dawn of this age, even Brahma is confused about the Veda. So then a person named Vyas comes, who's considered to be another manifestation of Vishnu, who says, I'm going to edit this stuff so that people can understand it again. So he's the first human-like author that we have. Shiva, Rajiv Trivedi asked if there's any role of Shiva. This is the story as told through the Bhagavad Purana and the Vishnu type Puranas. You may find in the Shiva Purana that they'll just put Shiva in the same place that you have Vishnu. It's not too important. But technically, according to the Bhagavata, Shiva develops things called agamas. His contribution to the Vedas is agamas and the yogas, like the disciplines, the sadhanas. Because he's the practitioner, he's the original yogi. Shiva, after Brahma came from Vishnu's womb through a flower, then Shiva came from Brahma's head. Doesn't mean that Shiva was created at that point. And it doesn't mean, right? It just means that this is how he entered the room. This is how he entered the world. Shiva exists forever, eternally, just like Vishnu. And Shiva and Vishnu are the same entity. It's playing different roles. So Shiva comes into the world through Brahma's head, literally, and then is very, very angry because he came when Brahma was very frustrated. And then Shiva manages to control himself, to control his anger and control his mind. And in doing so, he developed the system of yoga. He was the first one to master the system of yoga. So all the yoga traditions root to Shiva. And he's the original yogi, the original teacher of how to do mental self-control. So all of those parts of the Tantra and Agama root up to Shiva. But the first core of the Veda is Vishnu saying, this is how I... Vishnu is the basic substrate of reality, because he's the consciousness that pervades everything. So he's saying, this is how I perceive reality. He's explaining it to Brahma. Not with words, though, just from heart to heart. So Vishnu is the source of the Veda, but then of the explanations of the Veda, Shiva is the source of the how you discipline your mind and control your mind and perform yoga. So Indrago Mani says, is Veda like supreme Dharma? This is where I got... So listen to what I'm saying. Have I ever said anything like that so far? I said that the Veda is a revelation of knowledge of how to perceive the world accurately. Right, so it doesn't have to do with Dharma. Like, I guess it depends on what you mean by the word Dharma. But the Veda does reveal the Veda does reveal the actual Dharma of the world. The Dharma means the actual essence of it. What is that verse? Kaitavotra paramo nirmatsaranam satam. Dharma kaitavotra paramo. What's the word before that? Nirmatsaranam satam. It's whatever there's a Dharma word right before that. It says that the Vedas reveal, especially the Bhagavad Purana, reveals the true nature of reality without any cheating or duplicity. Okay. All right, so back to our main thing. Our main thing was, what's the Veda? The Veda is the revelation of how to perceive reality the same way that the manifester of reality does. It's manifest from Vishnu to Brahma. Brahma puts it into words, teaches it to some people that he created. They put it into words even more compactly as mantras, and they start to teach new people that are being created, and then things start to accumulate. Shiva's writing his stuff, different teachers are writing their things. There's all these different schools. So now let's talk a bit about the actual different branches of the Veda. Before Vyas gets in, there's no clear branching. There's this one big Veda and a whole bunch of stuff surrounding it, explaining it. After Vyas comes, at the beginning of our modern era, which is like 3000 BC, approximately, he says, look, there's 4 basic sections in the Veda, because he's the editor. He's going to organize it. So he says, basically, there's this section that's like the core, which is like telling you all the mantras that are the essential things that you have to do when you perform these Vedic ceremonies. So that, I'm going to call those the Samhitas, the core. Then there's other sections that are explaining the core. So I'm going to separate those, organize those separately, and I'm going to call those Brahmanas. Like this Nakshatra Sutra that we're doing is from Taittiriya Brahmana. So the Brahmana is a section of the Veda that explains something else about the mantras and the things that are in the ceremonies. Brahmana means comprehensive, comprehending. So understanding the core of the Veda is given in the Brahmanas. So every single core has a Brahmana to explain it. In fact, every single core has multiple branches in it, and each branch has a Brahmana explaining what's going on in that branch. And then there's another, Vyasa said, there's another section too, because these things are different for people who live in society or people who live like mendicants, like saints, like in caves. The things cannot be practiced the same by people who have wealth and homes and people who don't. So there's another section for the poor people, for the people who have nothing. How do you do these elaborate Vedic ceremonies if you live in a cave, in a forest? Those are called agamas. Not agamas. Those are called aranyakas. Okay, so there's the cores called the Samhitas, then there's the explanation that of those cores called the Brahmanas, then there's Agamas, which are simplifications of it. Now, the nice thing about a simplification is if you can simplify something but it still works, then you've really exposed the essence of it, the thing that you can't remove. And so that's what Agamas do, is they really expose, this is the essence of the ceremony, right? And then the fourth core is questions and answers. Questions and answers about the whole thing. And those are called Upanishads. That Upanishad means when you come and sit next to somebody and ask them a question. So the Upanishads are just a record of questions and answers about the rest of the Vedas. So what you get in the Upanishads is great philosophical clarity about what the rest of the Vedas mean. Okay? So I said there's these 4 sections that are pertaining to rituals, the ceremonies. And then he said there's this whole other bit that's giving the backstory behind all the characters that are involved in all these rituals. Like, okay, we're doing this ceremony for Agni, the god of fire. Well, who the heck is Agni? There's a whole section of the original Veda that tells you about Agni. There's whole sections that talk about Indra. There's whole sections that talk about Vishnu, Shiva. So he said, these I'm going to put in another branch, in a 5th branch, and those are called the Puranas. So those are called the 5th branch, Panchama Veda. He puts it over in the 5th branch. And then he says, and then he says, actually, I'm going to organize these 4 branches by theme. It gets a little more complicated. So he says, there's going to be a Rig theme, a Yajur theme, a Sama theme, and a Atharva theme. And each one is going to have there's 4 themes, each one with the 4 subjects, like a core, an explanation, a simplification, and questions and answers. And so the Rig theme is like, this is the original basic stuff. It's like the core of the core. And the Yajur theme, as far as I understand, is like, here's the it's more focused on the ceremony itself. And then the Atharva, the Sama theme is, here are the songs that you sing. It's more like a Purana. There's the songs that were sung during the ceremony. And the Atharva, theme of the Atharva is, this is what you do when things go wrong. If you make mistakes with the ceremony, this is how you fix the mistakes. All right, so you can see it's actually very well organized. The Vedic library is very well organized by Vyas, and it has these 4 sections, each with the 4 topics in it. And then it has a 5th section, which is all this explanatory stuff. And those are called the Puranas. So far, so good? Here, Iowa has an interesting question. If it's only empiricism and not revelation, hang on to that question. I'm going to explain that in that's the next bullet point, is how do you read them? So, what is this? Pyromaniac is asking about the beliefs of the Indo-Europeans preceding their entry into India. That's like that's the view of the Veda that you get. As I said in the beginning, if you ask somebody what the Vedas are, who hasn't soaked themselves in what they are, they're going to tell you something like Indo-Europeans invaded, because frankly, everybody's biased as fuck. Everybody is biased, and everybody wants to see their own culture be the best. So if you get European people studying the Indian history, and if you see, for example, that we got Zeus over here in Greece, and we got Indra over there in India, they're obviously the same exact person. Right? Or we got linguistic connections. We got cognates. We have words that are the same over here in Lithuania, and we got the exact same words and grammar over there in ancient India. So what are you going to do? If you're from Europe, you're going to say, well, that must mean that, my people went into India and colonized it, and brought the culture in there, and we brought our Zeus, and we brought our grammar structure in there, and those people adopted it. And if you're Indian, you're going to say, nah, of course, that means that we used to control the whole world, and we went out to Greece and we had our colonies out there and we had Indra, everybody, but they changed it over. They changed the name to Zeus and all that. So it's just forget the whole thing of like how the historical development of the thing happened. It's just going to be a wild goose chase of how the historical development. Think about what it actually is. And if you're going to embrace it at all, then embrace it. If you study, there's a saying from somebody named Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who's a famous, important guru in one lineage. And he says, don't be like a bee trying to taste honey without opening the bottle and getting in it. Don't lick the outside of a jar of honey. If you want to know what the Vedas are, don't study somebody who hasn't soaked it in, gotten in there. Get in there, get in the honey. Don't be afraid to believe the superstitions. Figure out what the superstitions are. Like if somebody just said to you, the Vedas have no author, then that would sound to you like this most superstitious statement in the world, right? What do you mean every book has an author? Right? But I just explained to you, if you let yourself deal with that here's something that doesn't make any sense. Let me try it on for size and see if it's ever going to make any sense. You don't do that with everything. Like, don't do that with any wild hobo who comes up to you. But here's something that is worthy of your trying. Like, wow, I don't know. This is the Veda. I mean, people, great people talk about this as if it's very, very important. So maybe I should give this a try, right? Don't just believe any weirdo that comes along and tells you any crazy thing. But when you have something that very respected people are saying, this is the greatest thing, and to you it looks like that makes no sense, give it a try. See. So I just explained to you how knowledge is inherent in its object. Redness is inherent in a rose. It doesn't need an author. It's created with the same thing. If you let your guard down and let your bias down that this is some old superstitious thing, then you'll actually see that it's not some old superstitious thing. It's amazingly real, vivid, living, accurate today. So it's not like the Vedas were not a development of Indo-Aryans coming in from another culture and populating the Dravidian blah blah. The Vedas are Vishnu explaining how to perceive reality to Brahma, and Brahma passing that same bit onto his children, who passed it on to their children, passed it on to their children, which after a while became incomprehensible. And then Vyas comes about 5,000 years ago, roughly, maybe more, maybe less, roughly, and says, got to edit this stuff because it's gotten crazy. It's gotten out of hand. It's too big. Like one of the early questions was, how do you read this? Can't find it anywhere. So one of the big problems at that point is it's just too big. Who can study all this stuff? So he condensed the whole thing, organized the whole thing, put the Vedas into their sections, put the ceremonial things into their sections, put the explanatory stuff into its section, the Puranas, and then said, let's give it a try. Let's see how people like it. And he took one great sage and he put one sage in charge of each of the 5 divisions. And he said, you teach this to people. And then, go ahead. Now let's start putting this out there and developing it and see how it works. So for a couple of generations, that was going on. Each different segment was getting more and more Brahmanas, more and more Agamas, more and more Upanishads. The Puranas were developing. More and more people were speaking them, narrating them, explaining them. They were growing. So after a while, Vyas checks back in. And he says, okay, but the same problem has happened now. It's grown too voluminous. And it's too plural. This is another very important point. Right? A very important point to get Vedic thinking, to get Vedic thought, coming from a world, whether you're Indian or not, even if you're Indian, you're still born in a world which is highly, highly Christian dominated. Not just Christian, but the Christian, Muslim, Judeo branch, rooted in the Mideast, just has become the background of the culture of modern global culture. And that culture is very monotheistic. And when you have a monotheistic mindset, then everything which is one or singular seems better to you. And that's why there's statements like, I am the truth, the light, and the way, and nobody comes to God except through me, etc., right? I'm the only way. That kind of mindset doesn't translate well into the East. The Eastern branch of looking at things is a pluralistic view of oneness. It's not just pluralism. That's another mistake. Is like, it's not just that India is pluralism. They believe in many gods, or they have many different religions. Finally, so the biggest joke is when you go to like a very basic like religious studies class, and they'll be like, the world has 5 basic religions: Judaism, Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, and Hinduism. As if there's such a thing called Hinduism. It just means like the religion that's over there in India. But guess what? When you get there, you realize that there's like hundreds of different types of people doing hundreds of different types of things. All of it is supposed to be called Hinduism. So then you think, there's just 100 zillion things over there. They're just so pluralistic. It's crazy. They're into polytheism. But we're into monotheism, they're into polytheism. But that's not India either. That's not the Vedic thinking either. The Vedic thinking is Veda, Abheda, Tattva. That the truth is something which is one, but has many, many manifestations. Another way to put it is Eko Bahusya. That the one thing must manifest as many. That's why the Upanishads mention it. So the Hinduistic thing is a pluralistic approach to a unification, the pluralistic approach to one reality, not a singular approach to one reality. So the Vedas never say like, this is how you be a good person. You worship this god, doing this particular thing. And if you do that, you're a good person. And if you don't do that, you're a bad person. They never ever say that. One page of one book will say, worship Shiva. Another page of another book will say, worship Vishnu. Another page of another book will say, worship Indra. It's not because they're crazy. It's because there's lots of different people who have lots of different attitudes and worldviews, and who relate to the divine in lots of different ways. That's why Indian Vedic thought presents lots of different doors. It's not like they have lots of different paths, but lots of different doors onto one truth. Lots of different truths leading up to this one central truth. So one stumbling block or challenge in trying to understand Vedic thought is there any unity to it, or is it all just a whole bunch of different options? So that was one thing that Vyas worked on. He thought, these books, like I gave this scholar charge of this branch, and that guy he got really into his branch, and he's saying like, this is the most important stuff, you got to do it like this, but I gave this other sage stewardship over this branch of the Veda, and this guy's doing the same thing. He's saying this is the greatest stuff. Everybody who's doing their own thing is saying this is the most important, and it's just getting confusing. So he thought, I have to get my hands dirty again. I got to do some more writing now. I'm going to do some writing, not just editing. So he said, I'm going to try to write something that's going to show the unity of all these various opinions, and how all these various opinions in the Vedic family are all different ways of looking at the one same thing. So it's not that either one of them is wrong or right, but they're different ways of looking at the one same thing. And I'm going to try to bring that out, how they're all pointing to the same truths. And I'm going to try to condense the whole thing so people can actually read it. Like, so that one person could actually read it in one lifetime. And so the first effort that he made to do that was called Vedanta Sutra. That very word Vedanta means the conclusion of the Vedas. Veda anta. Let's end the Vedas. Let's give it a conclusion. And sutra means small, like a thread. And threads tie things together, right? So he's going to tie together all these different opinions, and threads make things tight, stick together. So he's going to stick a thread through all these different schools of thought, being expressed by different Vedic sages. So you see, but going back to the question about author of the Veda, in one sense there's no author, because it's Vishnu. It's said to be the breath of Vishnu. It's just the existence itself. But in another sense, there's hundreds of authors of the Veda, because Brahma authored it in words, then Marichi and the seven sages authored it in their words, explained Brahma's words in theirs. Then the different sages wrote Brahmanas. So you have a Taittiriya Brahmana written by the sage, I guess it would be Taitri or something. I'm not sure, but these books are all named after the author. So you get specific authors writing their specific explanations about the original Veda, which has no author. So actually, it's an interesting combination of something which is unauthored and authored by thousands of people, and then it has this one primary editor, Vyas. So Vyas said, now I'm going to author the Vedanta Sutra to bring all this stuff together and give it a conclusion and show its philosophical conclusion. And he did that. And the Vedanta Sutra is something you can get today. I have it on my bookshelf somewhere. And you can read it. And there's a couple of, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of explanations of it, because every different school that establishes itself in India has to give their particular explanation of Vedanta Sutra. It's the classic way of doing it. So what was I thinking? So there's so many Vedas. So Vyasa says, I'm going to write this. He writes the Vedanta Sutra. He did it. You can still read it today, but there's going to be a problem with it. I'll explain what it is in a second. So here, the phone asks if the Vedic thinking is valid for reality on earth only. So this is going to blow your mind. And also, Iowa says it sounds like the Bible. Actually, it's really nothing like the Bible. The Bible is one small book, a collection of a couple of very small books into one thing. We're talking about. I think it's really counterproductive to do a lot of comparison between the religions. The Bible is the Bible. The Vedas are the Vedas. They're actually very, very, very different. They're so different. There's no question and answer section in the Bible. There's no explanations of things like that in the Bible compared to the Upanishads. So we're counterproductive. Try to understand a thing by direct experience. This was another question that came earlier. Is there only revelation, or is there any empiricism involved in the Vedas? So we'll talk about that in a moment, but the ideal way to understand something is by direct empirical comprehension, by direct comprehension of it. A substandard way of doing it is by upaman, which is analogy to something else. So try not to. If you can't experience the object directly, then the only way that you can get any understanding of it is through upaman, or analogy. So you can see, the Vedas are something like the Bible. Well, then the person gets the idea that they have something to do with religion and spirituality. But it's sort of pointing them sort of in the right direction. But hey, these Vedas, you can read them. You can find out what they are. So drop the analogies and just try to sit in it and soak it in. And don't make it be like something else. Just understand it on its own terms, what it is. Vedic thinking, is it valid for reality on earth only? The thing that's going to blow your mind is that, and this is going to blow everybody's mind, but believe me, I studied this for a long time, carefully, and I didn't just study it. I practiced, etc., etc., etc. There's only the earth. There's only the earth. There's billions and billions and billions and billions and billions of earths on billions and billions and billions of different planes and instances of earth. Right? But the modern So, like, if you take modern cosmology and bring it into Vedic thinking, you're gonna have to be very patient to try to figure out how modern cosmology works with the Vedic conception of reality. The Vedic conception of reality is the earth is Bu, the place where stuff exists. And so there's only one Bu. There's not like other Bus where other people exist. Although there's gods who dwell in stars. The gods dwell in the stars, they dwell in the nakshatras, but everything is focused around the Bu plane. Are there other planets with other people living on it? It may look that way to us because you may look out through a telescope and see another planet orbiting another star. But how does that relate to what the Vedas are saying? The Vedas are saying that's another Brahmanda. That's another egg of existence, that solar system. And maybe it has its own Bhumandala. Maybe it has its own plane where things exist, where consciousness is manifesting. Maybe it doesn't at this time, because there's all kinds of evolution. Things take time to manifest. So there's only Earth. The Vedas are written primarily for humans on Earth, but that doesn't mean that it's a small segment. That's the most important segment, according to the Vedas. But it is also said that the gods have to take recourse to the Vedas as well. So then we can answer your question of, is it valid outside of Earth? Yes, it's even valid in the gods' realms. And think about where it comes from. If you go back to where my story of where the Vedas come from, it comes from beyond the Earth. It comes from Vishnu's communion with Brahma, which happens in Satyaloka, not Bhuloka. Right? All right, so what were we up to? So Vyasa wrote Vedanta Sutra. So Vyasa wrote the Vedanta Sutra, and it really did explain everything, all in one little terse thing. The problem with it, though, is that you had to be a genius to understand it, because it's like these little codes explaining volumes and volumes and volumes of difficult information. And he recognized that after he wrote it, and he got his reviews back from people reading it. They're like, huh? Only the people that were super brilliant were like, wow. So I thought, this isn't really going to work, because the whole thing about this modern era is that people don't have time, don't have focus, don't have attention span, and they aren't even that smart. Their brains aren't nourished. Our brains are undernourished because the nature itself is in a winter phase, so it's producing weak vitamins and stuff. So our brains are not at full potential, our lifespans are short, our attention is diverted constantly. So he's like, this isn't going to... My point was to make it short, but not incomprehensible. And I'm writing for people who are less intelligent than humans usually are. So I better make this easier. So he wasn't satisfied with just writing Vedanta Sutra. So the tradition goes that he wrote a sequel. And that sequel is called Mahabharata. Mahabharata is authored by Vyasa. It's not part of the original Veda. And so Vedanta Sutra also is an author by Vyasa. It's not part of the original Veda, but it's explaining the original Veda. And so what he wanted to do with Mahabharata was, he said, look, I got to tell a story. These people need stories. They need dramas. So I'm going to tell us stories with using interesting characters, beautiful women, muscly men, warriors, wise people, magicians, wizards, monsters. I'm going to bring this all together in a story, and these stories are going to either illustrate the key points of the Vedas, or the characters in it are actually going to have conversations about this stuff, right? And so this is an amazing book, Mahabharata. It's an epic poem, greater in length than the Iliad and Odyssey combined, I believe, and it dwarfs the literary accomplishments of any other culture in terms of that measurement of how big is this epic poem. And also just in terms of the awesomeness of it, it's wow. The stories in that book are just like, oh my God. It's like Lord of the Rings is like second rate. And just like all this, like forget Harry Potter and all that junk. This is like, wow, this stuff is absorbing, entertaining, interesting stuff if you can get a good translation of it. Or if you can sink your mind into it, even if it's a bad translation. So then what he did with Mahabharata was he said, the most important thing I'm going to put in Mahabharata is this key chapter where I want Krishna to be an important character in this book because he's an important figure for this age, and I want him to speak the Vedanta Sutra basically in one easy to understand chapter. And so that's called Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is a chapter in Mahabharata. It's authored by Vyasa, spoken by Krishna. Krishna is the character, Vyasa is the author. All right, so now you know the main parts of the Veda. So if you want to study the Veda, then you should study Bhagavad Gita. Because Bhagavad Gita is the easiest, shortest, most complete way of understanding it all in one bit. I don't recommend any translations of Mahabharata particularly. All of them you'll have to try to supply something that it lacks. But anyway, so then by that same token, anything is great. Also, though, if you want to read Bhagavad Gita, I have my own translation. I wrote a translation of Bhagavad Gita. It's called A Simple Gita. And you can get it on the Amazon or anything. A Simple Gita. And what I do there is, it's just dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna. I translate it as dialogue. So it's kind of very simple and easy to read. All right, great. So how are we doing on time? Let me see what other questions you got here. Yeah, right. It looks to me, Asa says, that some creative genius wrote the Vedas to make God's words understood by normal, illiterate people. That's what Vyasa is doing. Vyasa is that creative genius. And that's what he did with Mahabharata. He made this very complex Vedanta Sutra into something very, very great. Problems with Gita. Let's talk a little bit about Gita translations. Actually, you know what? If you want to get Mahabharata, a great thing about that is you don't even have to read a book. They made television serials out of it. I think there's at least 2, maybe more. And though, of course, you're not going to really understand the nature of reality by watching the television serialization of the Mahabharata. Most of the story stuff is really well depicted, So actually, I kind of recommend watching the television serials of Mahabharata. I myself haven't watched any of the more recent ones, but I did loved watching B.R. Chopra. B.R. Chopra. I guess it was in the 80s, maybe, or probably was done in the 80s. Did a drama. Chopra. B.R. Chopra. He did a Mahabharata drama, which is just fantastic. So kitschy. Very, very, very 80s India feel to it. With very low budget and super ridiculous special effects, ridiculously poor special effects, but it gets its own lovableness to it because of that. So it's actually very well done. I like that one a lot. Now, as for Gita, so actually, to tell you the truth, I actually recommend that B.R. Chopra Mahabharata more than even reading a book of Mahabharata. Because Mahabharata's point really mostly is the storyline. Everything important, philosophically speaking, in Mahabharata is in Gita. So if you want to get the philosophical content of Mahabharata, just direct your attention to studying Bhagavad Gita. So let's talk a bit about Bhagavad Gita translations. The problem with Bhagavad Gita translations is people just use this book to push their own agenda. They'll just come up, they'll just say, they have their own agenda and they'll just push it. So supposedly you're reading Bhagavad Gita, but actually you're reading what this person believes in. And here and there he's talking about Bhagavad Gita at the same time. Even when you get Sanskrit in the Bhagavad Gita, okay, like Prabhupada in the ISKCON Hare Krishna Bhagavad Gita, which is called Bhagavad Gita as it is. So, thank you, patience. So, Bhagavad Gita as it is, Prabhupada was trying to say that, yeah, I mean, all these people are just trying to push their own agenda with Bhagavad Gita. Here's the Bhagavad Gita as it is. But the thing is, if you read that, it will also seem to you like he's pushing his own agenda. Because the truth of the matter is he's pushing the core final conclusion of the Gita. But he pushes it through in every verse. So Prabhupada's translation of the Gita, number one, it's Prabhupada, so it's going to be a stiffer style of English, and it's also going to be from the point of view of somebody that was born in the early 20th century or late 19th century. So it's not quite up to date, but fine, that's cool. But some of the ideas will be from that type of culture. But the thing that kind of makes it difficult for a lot of people to trust Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita is that he's taking the conclusion of it, which is Manmanabhava Madbhakto Sarvadharman Parityajam Mam Ekam Sharanam Braja. He's taking those conclusions, the final conclusions, that Krishna Bhakti is everything. And even when the verse is explaining karma yoga and how to do karma and how to do just good deeds for people, he's always bringing it to the final conclusion. So, also I don't recommend any. Now, if I'm giving you some critique of Prabhupada's Gita, then know for sure that I'm not going to be telling you should go read Osho's Gita or Chinmayananda's Gita. Because Prabhupada at least was a devotee of Krishna, the speaker of the Gita. But these other people, they're just like, whatever. They're pushing their own agenda. So the thing with the Gita, the thing is, you can use anybody's translation if you tread wisely. Just like, I don't know why this analogy is coming to my head, but if you use a condom, it's safe to have sex, right? So if you just go into a book without a condom, then it's like you're going to get infected by the author's concept. But if you have an intellectual condom where you put some distance between yourself and the author and you analyze the thing on your own as well, then you can use anybody's translation. If you're brave enough and have a little bit of intellect and self-confidence that you can get to the original Sanskrit. If you get a Gita that doesn't have the original Sanskrit, you're kind of up Schitt's Creek. Now, my Gita doesn't have the original Sanskrit, but if you trust me, then you'll be fine with that. But if you get, and the thing about my Gitas is it's this big. It's so small. The other Gitas are like this big. Why? Because there's so much explanation from the author about what it is. So, but just let the Gita, my thing is just let the Gita explain itself. So it's just short. I just translate the Gita. But in other cases where the author is giving you an elaborate explanation of what Krishna is saying in the Gita, then you want to have them give the Sanskrit so that you can check. Because after all, if you just practice a little Sanskrit, you can look it up in a dictionary and see if this is basically really what the guy's talking about. That's the nice thing about the Prabhupada Gita as it is, that he does give you the original Sanskrit. He even makes it kind of user-friendly to the English speaker. He puts it out in the ABC script, and then he even gives like, this word means this word means this word means this. So to read Gita, I would say, hey, since you're watching my YouTube channel, why don't you get my Gita and read my Gita? But if you think that's ridiculous, then there's also Prabhupada's Gita is probably good too, but just don't get turned off by the length of the thing and the fact that obviously he's pushing an agenda on it. Even though it's the agenda of Krishna, you won't get the natural plurality of the Gita. See, what the Gita is going to do is it does that. It harmonizes the plurality of the Veda. In Prabhupada's Gita, you're just going to get Krishna Bhakti through every verse, which is fine because that's what harmonizes the Veda, is Krishna Bhakti. But it's just, you may not be able to trust it. It might be untrustable. So anyway, I think I was gonna tell you a little bit about what the Gita does with the karma, jnana, and bhakti. Right? The karma, jnana, and bhakti. So, what the Gita basically does is it structures itself in 3 segments, and it says a lot of the parts of the Veda are talking about doing rituals, which doesn't mean just doing rituals, but doing actions, performing deeds the right way, doing things the right way. That's what a lot of the Veda talks about. And another part of the Veda talks about philosophy and knowledge, science. And then another part of the Gita talks about devotion, love, worship, bhakti. So what the Gita does is Krishna explains all 3 of them, what each one is, and how they're related to each other, and how they're not 3 separate ways of paths. They're not 3 separate paths, but they're 3 stages of a single path, and they're all interrelated. They're all intersupportive. All right, and then I think I should try to answer that one other question. There was one other question about epistemology and empiricism. Empiricism and revelation. The question was, are the Vedas only revelation, or is there also epistemology involved? What is it called? Empiricism. Like is there any experimentation or... See, this is so important too. So the Vedas are a revelationary text. This is how you read the Vedas. You don't read the Vedas experimentally so much. You read the Vedas with your heart open to receive them. You don't read the Vedas with your heart sharp to cut them up and dissect them. Because it's a revelation of information from Vishnu to you. And this is often misunderstood and can become just a guru cult, which would be like, just shut up and accept what I tell you. Right? Open your heart. I'll put a bunch of stuff in your heart, and then you accept it. So that's also not the Vedic tradition. Otherwise, why are the Upanishads full of questions and answers? The Vedas are not about just shut up. But the Vedas are a revelationary thing. Some superior entity is giving us knowledge. So it's not us experimenting and discovering the knowledge. It's coming from the superior entity. But it's not just, hey, you shut up and just accept it. So, just like the Vedas, the Vedic thought is a blend between pluralism and monism. Similarly, the Vedic epistemology is a blend between revelation and empiricism. So the blend is as follows. If I tell you, for example, that a rose is red, then you should go and look at a rose and see if it's red. If you see it and it looks white to you, you should come back and ask me a question. Right? That's why there's Upanishads full of questions. The Vedas say that the rose is red. The guru tells the student, hey, Vishnu said that the roses are red. And the student goes out and he says, what's this? This one looks white. So then the teacher gets a question back from the student. He says, yes, there can also be varieties of the roses, but the classic color of the rose is red. And then the student understands. Right? So the system of understanding the Vedas is to receive the information, and then this is actually described explicitly in the Upanishads, that the system of understanding the Vedas is to receive the information openly, deliberate upon it, which is called anuman, figure out what this information is, and then experiment with seeing it. So it's a different type of experimentation. It's not called an arohapata. It's an avarohapata. It's not an experimental path which you're building from the ground up. It's an experimental path on information that you're receiving. Like if I tell you a rose is red and you go and experiment, see if you can find a rose that's not red. That kind of experimentation and empiricism is crucial to understanding the Vedas. Otherwise, you're not engaged. Because the ultimate reality, the Veda has to become from Vishnu's heart. It had to go into Brahma's heart, and it has to go from Vishnu's heart to our heart, not just our head, and certainly not just our mouth. So you have to learn the Veda by something called pratyaksha, which means direct experience. So the goal, the aim of Shravana, of hearing the Veda, is that the Anuman, the deliberation upon it, will allow you pratyaksha, to see it working in reality. And so the experimentation or the epistemology involved in the Vedic way of doing things is to test the thing which is coming in. Not testing from the ground up, but testing the revealed information. And when it doesn't match, you ask questions about it. So this is also super important. This has a huge bearing on the astrological community. Because the astrological community has, frankly speaking, has a serious problem of lack of respect for classic figures. For the Vedas, it has a huge lack of respect for the Vedas. People, I won't name names, but people literally get away with saying that the Puranas are just religious bunk. And then they say that they're Vedic astrologers. If the Puranas say something about an astrological topic, you better accept it. Otherwise, you have no right to say that you are a participant in the Vedic culture. Now, to accept it doesn't mean you accept it blindly and you just believe. But accept it means, I got to figure out what this statement means, because this statement is made by an authoritative source of knowledge, the Puranas. And so people will say, in astrology you hear it all the time, no, we're just going to experiment, and whatever works is what's good. That's okay, that's cool, that's a modern way of thinking, fine. But just please, have some respect for the fact that you're claiming to be Vedic astrology. And then you're going to say, well, see, because I use a sidereal zodiac, I'm a real Vedic astrologer. But you don't even give a damn about what the Puranas say. And you don't care about what the true definitions of Brahman, Atma, Karma, Bhuta. You're just making up your own stuff all the time. You're making up your own theories, you're making up your own planets, and then you're saying that you're Vedic. Just come on. So the epistemology of the Veda is we accept authority, but not blindly. All right. Let's see. Any questions? Let's see what the questions are here. Please explain karma yoga. Karma yoga means the way of purifying yourself by doing deeds, by acting in an unselfish way. That's the essence of karma yoga. What's the nature of a deity? Are they external beings, or are they just how we understand and relate to complex forces? Deities are not external beings, not just external beings. They are external beings. They are beings with their own independent existence, but their existence is very great, and so they're also a part of your existence. For example, Agni is the deity of fire. There is a being who's Agni, who exists in Agni Lok. But this being is also in your eyesight, because your eyesight depends upon light, and light is the property of fire, the elemental fire, right? So you take Indra. Indra is a deity who exists in Swarga. He's a person. But Indra, that person is not a person like Joe from Kokomo. It's Indra. So that person is the person who provides the grasping power in the hands. So Indra also exists in your hands. So he exists in your hands, but he also exists as Indra. So it's both. The deity is actually a person. And most of these deities you can become if you want, because they're living entities like you who are fulfilling different roles. And most of these deities you've already been. They are deities, but the nature of what they are is that they're also spread out in many, many places. Their existence is not limited. Somisak, my birth chart's worse with Sun. This is totally off subject. Indian Ayurek. Were there not Shrutis translated from generations to generations without any written form? Yes. Yes. That was also the thing at the beginning of Kali Yuga. That was one of the things that Vyasa had to do, is get it all in writing. However, so okay, this is nice. So Somisak is saying, look, the Vedic tradition is oral. So there's people explaining things to their students, etc., etc. Who knows what secrets they may have had? Who knows, right? They probably were talking about Nakshatra Navamshas, and they probably were talking about Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, because we don't know. They were just talking. They didn't write it down. Well, maybe they were talking about Twinkies and ringdings. We don't know. But that's total garbage. We do know what they were talking about, because we believe in Vyas. We trust Vyas. And we trust that the teacher taught the student teaches the next student, the student that teaches the next student. If they were talking about Twinkies and Neptune and Pluto, then it would have been taught to the student, and we would still have it today. If it doesn't still exist, then probably it was part of the stuff that got left out because it wasn't really that important. But even more important than that, Vyas is the incarnation of Vishnu, who came at the beginning of Kali Yuga to edit the Vedas, to put them into the form that we need to have them in now. So if the stuff that Vyas edited doesn't talk about Twinkies, ringdings, and lizards living in the middle of the earth, then guess what? That stuff wasn't in the original oral tradition. Or if it was, he thought this stuff shouldn't be in the stuff that the people are learning about now, because there's no way they're going to get it. Okay? So it is true that the Vedic tradition prior to Vyas was entirely oral, because the brains of human beings in previous epochs were more well-nourished by nature and had fantastic memorization capabilities. So books were not really required. Also, Sanskrit itself is a highly memorizable language. It's very metric. So it wasn't required to write things down. But it's not like campfire stories. These weren't campfire stories. That's not that kind of oral tradition. And it's not that just because it was an oral tradition that anything goes. Okay? Let's see what else. Thank you, Rajiv. Pradeep Runka asks, Mahabharata is not a real Veda? It is a real Veda. It's written by Vyas, the editor of the Veda. But it's... Okay, what is a real Veda? A real Veda is... What is the real Veda? Nobody knows what the real Veda is. It wasn't even in words. The real Veda was Vishnu's communion with Brahma, to allow Brahma to perceive reality in the same way that he did. Then Brahma put it into words. So I guess maybe those words are the real Veda. See, this is when you have Arya Samaj. If any people who are Indian, they'll know that there's this elitist group of people who are Arya Samaj or Brahmo Samaj and things like that, which are like, Puranas are garbage, Mahabharata is garbage, it's for housewives and other ridiculously silly people, blah, blah, blah. We only Purva Mimamsa, we just, study the Vedas. The Rik, the Sama, the Yajur. So, okay, well, Rik, Sama, Yajur, that's also written, that's not by Vishnu, that's not Apurusheya, that was written by Marichi and the Seven Sages. And so is that the real Veda? Or what about, the student that Rishi taught, and under whose guidance he wrote an Agama, or he wrote a Brahmana or something? That's not a real Veda? So the thing is, the Vedic Veda itself is not an entirely static thing. It's got a core to it, and in fact, some of the Vedic texts like Bhagavad Purana give you the core. They say, hey, here's 4 verses that are the core. When they explain Vishnu's communion to Brahma. But the Veda has a core, and then it's got a lot of growing stuff around it of people explaining the core, and that stuff is Vedic. That's if you take ikka, and add it on the end of a word, it's a lot like in English when you say ik. Sonic means like having something to do with sound, right? So in Sanskrit, it's the same exact suffix. Ik means having something to do with the thing, like some kind of a tool or an instrument of the thing. So, excuse me. So Vedic means it has to do with the Vedas. So you get all the Brahmanas. Everything really is Vedic. So what about Mahabharata? It's not one of those. It was written by Vyas. So it didn't exist prior to Vyas. It means it didn't exist prior to 5,000 years ago, roughly. But what is it? Nor did the Vedanta Sutra, nor did the Srimad Bhagavatam, nor did the Bhagavad Gita. But these are the 3 most important texts for our modern age. Because he didn't create them ex nihilo. He didn't create them out of nothing. He created them. He said, this is what the Vedas should look like in this age for these people to understand it. So Mahabharata is a real Veda. It's the most important Veda for this age. But it didn't exist in that form. Like Brahma didn't speak the Mahabharata to his children. Vyas wrote it. Any Vedic symbolism for the planets? The Vedic. Okay, so now the Vedas have these things called angas. Just like, so we talked about amshas and angas. So like this is my anga. This arm is an anga for me, right? So Vedas have like appendages, there's 6 of them. 6. There's 6 of them, which you have to study these 6 things before you can study the Vedas. So it's like the preschool. And what's the question again? Is there any Vedic symbolism for the planets? 4 of the 6 have to do with language, because the Vedas utilize words. So before you can get into the utilization of words, you have to know about how this language is going to be utilized. So they teach you pronunciation, they teach you meter, they teach you word meanings and how to derive word meanings, and they teach you how the grammar is going to be used. Those are the first 4 angas that you have to know. And then the other 2 angas are for timing things. Once you know what the Veda is talking about, when should you apply it? When does it apply? So the 5th anga is called Jyotish, and the 6th anga is called Kalpa. So the 5th anga of the Veda is Jyotish, and people will tell you that Jyotish means Vedic astrology, which is true, but it has nothing to do with the charts and bhavas and vimshotaris and all that stuff. The Vedic Jyotish doesn't talk about planets. It just talks about nakshatras, sun and moon. And then you can hear about planetary dignities in the Veda, planetary deities in the Vedas, but they're not saying that this planet is this deity. It's later on. So there's like the horoscopic astrology that we're familiar with, where there's 12 signs, 12 houses, 7 planets, 9 planets, is not described in the Vedas or the Puranas. Although the Puranas, as I make a big point of, do describe the 12 signs. So that much is there, but you're not going to hear about... They do make reference to a lagna, like for example in Krishna's birth. It may be an indirect reference to a lagna, to an ascendant, that Rohini was ascending. But they're not, the Vedas are not... It is disappointing if you think that when you hear Vedic astrology, you think, wow, this astrology comes from the Vedas. And then when you find out that it doesn't really come from the Vedas, it's a little disappointing. But still, this is the Veda, this is the astrology that's practiced in the context of the Vedic philosophy. in the context of the Vedic culture. That's very exciting. Really, the horoscopic astrology that we use today is developed at a later time, maybe 1800 years ago. But that's fine. The astrology that's part of the Vedanga Jyotish is for timing ceremonies, and therefore has a lot in common with electional astrology. So it's very close to the Muhurta kind of thing. And in fact, in that book, Taittiriya Upanishad, there's Muhurta recommendations for, if you want this kind of an activity, do it with this nakshatra. That's mentioned in that book. So Vedic astrology is quite the astrology of the Vedas itself. This is another good book, Astrology in the Vedas and Puranas by Pathak, K.K. Pathak. I recommend to try to learn about what's really in there and what's not really in there. So it doesn't really go much into planets and stuff like that. Let's see what else. I'm into the topic, so I'll go over time. I don't care. Who are some YouTube astrologers who would give my stamp of approval to? Why do I have to do that? Everybody's cool. See which one you get along with. Just Krishna I can tell you about, but it's too late. It's too important to go fast. Is it possible for new Vedas to be written? It is. There wouldn't be new Vedas, but there would be new explanations of Vedas. For example, just translating it into a new language is kind of putting it into a new form. Writing a commentary on a Veda is like expanding the Veda as well. That's possible. It would be the revelation of a teacher trying to explain to you how they've understood the revelation. That's what the new bit would be. Let's see, I thought there was one other. Oh, Ramayana. Ramayana. Fernando Miller asked, "What about Ramayana?" So Ramayana is not by Vyas. It's by Valmiki. So it's a different sage who wrote an elaborate biography of the Rama avatar of Vishnu. So this is a very important book. It's Vedic, obviously, right, because it's related to Rama, but it's not in this strand of evolution of that Vyas. It's not part of the main Vedas itself. It's like an ancillary Vedic work. Because that author, Valmiki, is not Vyas. That's why. Okay? All right, great. This was a very, very exciting session. So we still didn't actually cover the concepts. Remember, let me go back and show you the things that we wanted to cover. We wanted to cover what the Vedas are. So we explained what they are. They're a revelation of how to perceive reality, which has been explained and explained and explained and explained over time, and then edited and then put into specific forms that we have them today. And it's how to read them. You have to read them with the revelation thing. It's not that you're experimenting to discover the knowledge. You need to be open to the knowledge, but to apply your logic and experience to try to figure out how this revelation makes sense. Like if somebody tells you that the sky is green. If the Vedas said that the sky is green, then you would have to think about, like, what the heck does that mean? I see that the sky is blue. Why does the Vedas say the sky is green? So you'll have to deliberate on that. What do they mean? What do these words mean? What does it really mean? Until you finally can see it. Aha! I understand. It didn't mean green. It meant verdant. It meant the source of life or something. So a lot of times you'll have to figure out how to conform your experience to the revelation, and how the revelation can inform and make sense with your experience. That's how you read them. And also in the practical thing of how to read the Vedas, Gita is the best place to go. And actually, not only do I have a translation of Gita, but I have a class. I do an online class on Gita, and I'm going to work on putting that up so that you can get it less expensive. It doesn't have to be person to person. And then what we didn't cover today, I wanted to cover the 6 main principles. Oh, so we also did cover also karma, bhakti, and jnana briefly when we talked about what's in the Gita. The 6 main principles of Vedic thought, we didn't touch on that at all. So let's have that be next week's topic. What is Brahman? What is consciousness? Because these are the key things. If you understand these 6 topics, then you understand what the Veda is trying to tell you. What is consciousness? What is the soul or an individual? What is action, karma? What is matter, stuff, real stuff? What is this real stuff? The tangible stuff. What is the tangible stuff? And divinity. What does it mean to be divine? And motive. What should I endeavor for? That's called yagya. What should I try for? What should I strive for? What should I try to attain? Those are the 6 topics in the Veda. Next week we'll go over it. All right, I'm glad to see so much interest in this, equaling my own. Not as much as when I talk about eclipses or sex, but I'm glad to see that there's some interest in what the Vedas are. Thank you, everyone. I'll see you next week, same time, right? Same exact time, 7:30 p.m. Pacific time, Thursdays. And I'll see you in the middle of the week. I'll make my next recording. Haribol, thank you so much.